Hi, welcome back. My name is John, and this is another video in our series Flannelgraph Prep. 7 steps to prepare a flannelgraph story to effectively present a biblical story and a discussion later on to a group to have an impact on their life. I told you last time we were together that when we started, I was going to tell you another story, and I'm going to do that today. It's not a biblical story, but it's a story that if you listen to it very, very carefully, and we're going to talk our way through it and explain it, will actually give you the tools for digging deep into a biblical story to find spiritual treasure, which is not generally on the surface. You have to dig for it. Here's our story. There were some villagers that had been arguing over who had the water rights to a well for quite a while. And they couldn't get any resolution. They couldn't resolve their conflict. What they did agree to do is to go and see a man in their village known as the wise counselor. Now, the wise counselor was famous for asking all sorts of questions. So the villagers came to the wise counselor. But before he let them do anything, he stopped them and he asked them this. Listen, in just as short amount of words as possible, would you just tell me what your problem is? Tell me the situation. What's the problem? And each side did exactly that. They explained the situation. Then he asked them to do this. Now, I want you to think back. Before the problem actually started, can you think back and explain to me what happened to get you to this point? And so they did. They explained what had happened in the past that brought them to this area of conflict. Then he asked the villagers to begin to tell their story, but to tell it slowly and not leave out any details that would be important so he could really truly understand what was happening so he could give them good advice. And the villagers began. Now they had gotten just a short way into their story when the wise counselor stopped them, and he began to ask them some questions. Listen, just in this part of the story, just this part, can you tell me, what choices did you make? Did you make any choices? Did you make any decisions? Did you come to any conclusions? And they explained the choices that they had made. Then he asked them, well, when you think about it, were there any other choices that you could have made? Fact is, if you think about it, maybe even wish you might have made. What other choices did you have? And the villagers explained as they thought it through and the choices that they had made and the choices that they could have made. He said, but now let's go back and let's talk about the choices that you did make. What was the result of that choice? Who all was impacted by the choice that you made? And they discussed that. What the result of that choice was, what the result of this choice was, who all was impacted by the different choices that they had made. And then he asked them to think precisely. Do you remember specifically what each of you said and what you did during this time? And they talked about that and how that had affected the outcome. Then he asked them to continue with their story. They told some more of their story, and the wise counselor stopped them once again. And he began to ask them, guess what? You're right. The same questions he'd asked them before. Now, in this part of your story, when this happened, do you remember the choices that you made? Were there other choices that you could have made? Looking back, maybe even wish you might have made? What was the result of the choice that you did make? And who all was impacted? And do you remember specifically what you said and what you did? And the wise counselor followed that pattern, and he stopped them at intervals as they walked their way slowly through their entire story. And at each stop, he would ask them those same type of questions. What choices did you make? What choices could you have made? What was the result of that choice? Who all was impacted? Do you remember specifically what you said? Do you remember specifically what you did? And after he had listened to their entire story and had heard the entire story from both sides, the wise counselor was able to give them good advice, and they were actually able to find some resolution to their problem. Now, the stories in God's Word, in many ways, are very, very similar. Do you remember the very first question that the wise counselor asked the villagers when they first came to him, before they even started telling their story? He asked them to describe in just a few short words, maybe just in a sentence or two, what was their situation. Every story in God's Word has a situation. But just like the villagers, you might see the situation one way. Someone else that's listening to the story might see a situation or problem the other way. Isn't that interesting? You see, the situation is usually where we connect emotionally with the story. What made the biggest emotional impact on you? That's what you might see as the situation. Discuss that briefly. Then you remember the second thing he had them do? Look back. Look back. What happened to get them to the place where they were in the story? In the biblical stories, we call that the context. It's really important in any biblical story to understand the context, but there's actually two different types. You see, what the wise counselor was asking the villagers is to give him the historical context, to give him the actual facts, what actually happened to lead up to that. And we do that in a Bible story. It's very easy to do if you have the ability to read, or if you can either listen to or read the background material that we've added in our scripts. That will give you some of that historical biblical background. But we've also added what's called a spiritual context. What's a spiritual context? A spiritual context, which the wise counselor would not have asked, is in a biblical story, there's something that's actually going on. These people are reacting to God, to His Word, to His ways, to His commands. And so we would ask questions like, okay, how is God working in these people's lives? Are they walking in obedience? Are they in rebellion? Are they confused? Are these followers of God? Do they not know anything about God? What's happening in their life? How is God working in their life? Or how is God attempting to work in their life? That's the spiritual context. So we look at the historical context, we look at the spiritual context, we look back. That's the context of a story. Then you remember what he did next? He asked them to begin to tell their story slowly, not leaving out any details, and that is what we do in our stories as well. And you remember, they didn't get very far into the story when he stopped them and he began to ask them a series of questions. And these are the questions that are our actual digging tools to help us to dig deep into a biblical story. Let me remind you of what they are. Remember, he asked them, and I'm going to be adding some gestures and stuff to help you be able to remember some of these. Remember the first thing he asked them? Did you make any choices? This is our motion for choices. Okay? Did you make any choices? Well, wherever I stop, that's my choice. And then he asked them, but were there any other choices that you could have made? Any other decisions, any other options that you had? And you want to discuss that. Why? Well, because if there isn't any other options, the decision that they actually made is not nearly as important as it truly is. So you talk about the choices in each part of the story, beginning at the start, working chronologically through a story, section by section, with the flannelgraph, scene by scene. What choices were made? What other choices might have been made, could have been made? Then you go back and you consider the choice that was made. What was the result of that choice? Who all was impacted? And if they said something, you want to look spiritually. What does it tell me about these individuals in this story spiritually, about what they actually said, the words that they used, the attitude that they had, and the actions or the choices that they made, what they actually did? And you want to discover that. But In a biblical story, there's one part that the wise counselor never talked about because it was just a historical event. And that is, well, before I tell you that, let me tell you another story. And this actually happened to me. I was actually overseas. I was in Eastern Europe, and I was teaching a class at a Bible college, and all of my students were women, which was great. They were really, really smart, very, very sharp, very, very diligent in their studies. I mean, if I gave them an assignment to do, it was going to get done. And so one of their assignments one day, I had given each group, I think there were 4 different groups, I'd given each group a different biblical story, and I asked them to put down on paper every character, major and minor, in the story. And they took a few moments, they worked through the story, and they did that. And so I asked a spokesman from each group, tell me all the characters in your story, and they gave me the list. When they were all done, I looked at them and I said, I'm actually a little disappointed, because I was surprised because every single group had left out one of the characters and a main character in their story. So I said, I'm going to give you another 2 minutes to correct this. Oh man, they about tore their Bibles apart, trying to figure out. They hadn't left anybody out. Then I said this. I went to the board, and with some chalk back then, I wrote the word God in big, huge letters. Oh, their eyes opened up, they gasped. They had forgotten, but we can't forget. Whether God's name, whether the name of Jesus, whether the Holy Spirit, whether any portion of the Godhead is actually named in a story, God is involved and is the main character in every story, in every part of every story in the Bible. And so you need to keep that in mind. So as part of your discussion, as part of your digging into the story, in every part of the story, ask yourself these same questions that you asked about every other character in every other part of the story. Beginning at the start of the story, moving chronologically through the end, scene by scene. What decisions, what choices did God make in this part of the story? What other choices did God have? Discuss that. Go slowly. Remember the path story? When we look at the choice that God did make, what was the result of that choice? Who all was impacted by the choice that God made? And if God actually says something in the story, what can we learn about the character, the attributes, the nature of God? Asking that question, what is God like? What can I learn from what God actually said and what God did? If you'll take the time, and in these next few videos, the next time we get together, we're actually going to take this story that we have learned from Flannelgraph, and we're going to take just the first part of this story, and we're going to work our way through each of these series of questions, and you're going to get the chance to do that, looking at the decisions that they made, the choices that they made, the choices they could have made, going back to the choice they did make. What's the result of that? What's the impact? Who all was impacted? Now, what do we learn spiritually from what they said or actually what they did? And last of all, now we point up, where do we see God in this story? What choices did God make? What choices could he have made? When we look at the choice that God did make, what was the result of that choice? Who all was impacted? And if God actually says something, or God actually does something, what does that tell us about God? What is he like? Those are the tools which we're going to be using. And if you become skilled at these tools, you will be able to unlock any single story in all of God's Word and go spiritually deep in that story rather quickly. And if you remember from the path story, if you have the wisdom to go slowly, you'll become very, very skilled. And this Flannelgraph set that you have will become an extremely effective tool in your hands, not only for you personally, but for everyone that hears you. I can't wait till we get together next time. This has been Flannelgraph Prep. Can't wait to see you again. Thanks for watching.